Left in Kentucky, the podcast of indivisible Northern Kentucky. Hello, everybody. How's everyone?
Hello.
We're here once again with yours truly, Roberto Henriquez. We also have
Amy Ferguson
and Dickerson.
And we're here with you in the midst of the most recent apocalypse. And, you know,
dun, dun, dun.
I know we didn't make our regular recording last week. I know there hasn't been much going on. So, you know, I'm sure, I'm trying to think, has there been anything in the news lately? No.
I mean, it's been pretty slow.
It's been pretty quiet, I think. So, oh yeah, there's that little COVID-19 thing. So,
you mean that Democratic hoax?
Yeah, the Democratic hoax. So that's been going on, and so we've had to make some adjustments. We got our technology together, and we are all participating from our own apocalyptic bunkers via the wonder that is technology.
Hello from Farmhaven.
Yeah, it's almost like we're in the same room, but not.
Almost. But not.
But not. So anyway, hope everybody is staying safe out there and maintaining their social distance and doing what you're supposed to do. Unfortunately, as usual, not everybody is doing what they should be doing, which is my segue into our cow patties.
Oh, it's going to be good.
Yep, our cow patties this week. So there we go. I got my sound effect going now.
We could probably do a whole episode just on our cow patties.
We could. And then we'd have lots of fertilizer. I am planning on starting a garden. So I've decided I need to grow some food. So
well, I do have some cow patties you can have.
Awesome.
All that you can take.
Awesome.
No problem.
So anyway, why don't Amy? Why don't you start us off with our cow patties today?
Well, you know, I've been thinking a long time about who I wanted to bestow my cow patty upon this time, and I had pretty much decided that it was going to be Rand Paul, our junior senator, because of his vote against the bill in the Senate. To help all the Americans out to deal with this pandemic.
Right.
And so hours before we are set to do this, I find out that he's tested positive for COVID-19. So I don't know. I think that he has pretty much stepped in the cow patty himself. So I will let him shake that off his boots a little while. And
I want to know, how do you test positive for a hoax, right?
Right. It seems odd.
Because his dad's website doesn't even have a headline that says the coronavirus Democratic hoax or something like that?
I would not.
Oh, it absolutely does.
Wasn't our congressman, Mr. Massey, on Ron Paul's show? I think he was.
Probably.
Oh, yeah.
So,
you know, karma's always been my favorite mistress.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, those pieces of poop, they get stuck in your boot. You know, they're hard. You got to scrape that stuff out. So he's going to be hopping around for a little while, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's a good one. All right, Ann, who do you have in your crosshairs this week?
Oh, Lord. Who do I not have in my crosshairs?
It is a target-rich environment.
Amen to that. Okay, so I couldn't narrow it down to just one person. So I'm going to go with the Kentucky State Senate GOP governing body as a whole. What they've done under the leadership of, Majority Leader Damon Thayer and Senate President Stivers is it's just beyond cruel. But it's past cruel to the point of just outright stupidity. And I say stupidity as opposed to ignorance because they aren't uneducated on the issues. They're making a conscious choice to do what they're doing.
Absolutely.
So I want to make that clear. If you guys remember, back in January, our governor, Andy Beshear, gave his budget address to the state. Yep. And Damon Thayer was on video and was quoted at that time, with some derogatory remarks thrown Beshear's way about how, something about how using nice language, basically making fun of him, that it was all flowers and fluff. And his direct quote was, now the Kentucky Senate GOP and the Kentucky House GOP will get to work on a, quote, responsible budget for Kentucky. And he needs to be hammered on this every day through the election, since he's up for re-election this year.
Absolutely.
Because he claimed that their budget was going to be responsible. So let's talk about what they did. The first thing they did when they sat down to draft their budget proposal was they used numbers from December, right, which are grossly out of date at this point because of the coronavirus.
Right.
I mean, there isn't on the federal or any state level any kind of budget that anybody can be held accountable for, because we do not yet know the full ramifications of what this is going to do to us.
No,
and it's going to affect our economy and people and businesses and the whole nine yards. It almost seems like the smarter thing to do, which I should remind people is what Andy Beshear wanted them to do, was he wanted them to do one of two things, and they weren't happy with his choice. And they wanted him, in order to go home, because, he's been on the front lines about social distancing and all this other stuff.
Right.
But their response was, well, we'll only stop and go home if you agree to call us back into a special session where that's open-ended. They wanted to be able to do and deal with anything that they wanted to in that special session.
Is that even constitutional?
No, it's not. And that's the one thing that nobody hammered Stivers on when he tried to call out Andy Beshear, which I think is really funny. According to the Kentucky State Constitution, a special session has to have a delineated reason for calling people back in. It cannot be open-ended.
Right.
And it's only supposed to be for a limited number of days. So Andy Beshear gave them two choices. He said, look, you guys can either hammer out the budget and any bills related to the COVID-19 and gavel out and be done, or gavel out and be done now, and I will call you back into special session only to deal with those issues.
Right.
Because, and his rationale was, nothing else matters right now, which is absolutely true.
Absolutely.
Well, what they attempted to do was they had reached out to him with their proposal, and he said no, was all they said. They didn't put it into context. They didn't say that he had the alternatives that he had given them. So, that led to that. So they decided to stay in, and you've got all of these other legislators who are like, we want to go home. We don't want to be here. You have pictures of Attica Scott. God love that woman.
Oh, yeah.
Sitting up in the balcony.
Right.
Yeah, because she was social distancing.
Right. Because otherwise, when they're sitting in down in the gallery, they're not 6 feet apart.
No, they are right on top of each other. I mean, there's the chair arms touch each other. That's how close they are.
Right. So anyway, to make a long story even longer, the Republicans decided we're just going to plow ahead. We're going to do what we want to do. And they've done, they could receive, truthfully, a cow patty award of peace for this bullcrap. Because they decided to push ahead with their agenda. And one of the number one things on their agenda this year was that ridiculous voter ID law.
Yes.
Yeah.
So at a time, on top of the budget, which we'll delve into a little bit, but on top of that, they passed this bill that's requiring, a specific state photo ID at a time when every DMV in the state is closed.
Right.
Now, and they put it as emergency status so that it goes into effect immediately because they want it to be in effect and in time for the November election.
Oh yeah.
And we're like, what the?
I mean, at this point,
even sees that as what logical, responsible person thinks
there's
that
your problem right there.
Right, but thinks that that's a good idea. Number one, it's going to take money to do it, right? We have no clue how much money we're going to have because they're so busy denying any opportunity for new revenue in the state that we don't have the money to do any new things, much less the regular old things that we need to do.
right.
So the whole thing was just ridiculous.
And revenue revenue is going to be so far off this year with all the businesses being closed, all the people being let go. I mean, they aren't, that's payroll that's not being paid. So all those payroll taxes aren't being collected. And the state budget is going to be hammered when we start seeing the effects of that.
Right. So, what did they do? Well, they decided they were going to stay in session until they hammered out the budget that they wanted to hammer out. We've talked about doing some positives. So here's a positive for you. I do give credit where credit is due. And the House GOP in Frankfurt, much, much, much better team players in terms of doing what's best for Kentucky.
Yeah.
Because the budget that the House passed was very much a bipartisan effort.
For the most part,
and why the Senate couldn't just look at that and go, "That's good, let's go." It's beyond me, but it was clear that it was entirely agenda driven.
Yeah, if I remember. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just to say, if I remember right, but even the budget that the House passed still zeroed out the Wired Kentucky initiative.
Right. I mean, it wasn't
either.
Which is something we desperately need now.
Right.
Obviously, it wasn't perfect. When they started on it, we weren't, at the point that we are at now. Right. And remember, the governor always has on the budget, the governor has that line item veto that he can use.
Right.
But we're in a position where, unfortunately, we have a state GOP party that's drunk on power because they have a supermajority in both chambers. And so they only need a simple majority on this budget to override vetoes.
Yeah.
I think. No, the budget may take 60.
I think the budget
or more.
I think the budget still takes 60.
Or 2/3, whatever that is. But the budget may take more. But on other bills, they can easily override any vetoes. So let's look at some of the specifics. Number one, the Senate budget has nothing, not one thing to address the COVID-19 epidemic. I mean, on the last day that they met last week, they had a bill. It was Senate Bill 150 that was the language of which was replaced in its entirety by a House committee amendment or whatever that made it a COVID-19 bill, and the Senate left and went home without even bringing it to a vote. That's number one.
Wow.
Number two, it cuts $46 million from public health departments.
Well,
now here we are.
We don't need money in the health department.
Right. In the middle of a pandemic, they're still writing the bill and bringing it to a vote at a time when, it's not like the House's version that was already done.
Right.
They know it's not like they're clueless that this is happening, and yet they do this anyway. Now, I mean, it's the lack of it just does. How do you take a dime from public health departments when we need them now more than ever? The other thing, it fails to fund the coronavirus hotline. Now, currently, that costs $500,000 a month to operate.
Right.
Their backhanded way of doing anything with it was to provide $250,000, so $250,000, so a half of a month's worth of money next year.
Well, that should be enough.
Yeah. Right? Nothing for this year. And I'm just sitting here going, with the pedigrees of some of the people in Frankfurt, you would expect a heck of a lot more than this. There's nothing in the Senate budget to address unemployment insurance, and we all know how many people are going to need it. It's going to be disastrous.
Yep.
Then the other thing that they put in there was withholding $1 billion from the teacher retirement system, yes, unless they agree to structural changes to the pension. So at a time when our, retirees cannot afford to lose a dime and are having to rethink every aspect of how they do business in a world where we're basically, quarantining ourselves to stay safe, they're going to hold them hostage. And they're using the coronavirus as an excuse to do it. It's ridiculous. It's petty.
Yeah.
It's pathetic. I mean, there aren't enough negative words that I can say in a public forum to describe just how bad this is. However, it should be noted that Damon Sayer made it a point to find the funds for the horse industry to get what they wanted.
Well, of course he did. Of course.
Our health departments get defunding. Our teachers are getting crushed. We have nothing in there for unemployment for people, but by God, the horse industry is going to be saved. I want to know who the hell they think is going to have the money to go to the horse races when this is over.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it was just, it's just so bad. And that's like minimal. That's not even going through, every little detail of things that is so horrifically bad in this budget.
Wow.
And they're, they should have just, when Governor Beshear called for, everybody to quit gathering in public over so many people, they should have just ended the session. They should have gabbled out, sine die, or put a blank budget on the table, because by the Kentucky Constitution, they have to have a balanced budget. I believe it's by April 15th.
Yep.
You would think, since they've extended the deadline now for taxes, both at the state and the federal level, until July 15th, you would have think they could have come up with an emergency bill that somehow dealt with that. But they should have just gabbled out and then agreed to let the governor call them back into special session to deal with COVID and the budget, because it's the only thing they can really afford to focus on this year.
Right. No, absolutely.
So, I mean,
and that's the disturbing thing, right? I mean, these are our leaders who have been elected, and we expect them to act responsibly and act in our best interest. And when we're in the middle of a pandemic, and in the middle of that pandemic, which is causing a financial crisis, and instead of focusing on those things, the most serious things, they continue to just hammer away at their agenda like nothing else is going on.
Right. It's just, the whole thing is just abhorrent to me. I cannot understand anyone so hell-bent on being just deliberately, consciously cruel to other human beings. And that's what they're doing. Yep. There's no denying it. And how anyone would possibly defend that is beyond me.
Yep, I agree. All right, so that was definitely a well-deserved cow patty. Absolutely.
That's a field of cow patties by itself.
Yeah, I don't think I can hit the cow patty sound effect enough for that one. So, all right, so my cow patty is going to Representative James Comer. For those who don't know, Representative James Comer represents the 1st District in Kentucky. And he was one of the lovely people that after a private briefing on the coronavirus, sold a bunch of stocks back in February. And before the word came out on just how bad the coronavirus actually was and how much it was spreading, and before the stock markets started falling. So so he I don't know if I have actual numbers on how much he sold, but yeah, he, along with North Carolina Senator Richard Burr and who else? Kelly Loeffler from Georgia, Jim Einhoff from Oklahoma, and Dianne Feinstein from California all sold tremendous amounts of stocks before the news came out and before the stock market took its nosedive. So they deserve, and Comer, since he's here in Kentucky more so, didn't get my cow patty for this episode. Hopefully there will be
well deserved.
Hopefully the SEC, Security and Exchange Commission, not the Southeastern Conference, hopefully the Securities and Exchange Commission will be investigating those trades in depth to find out if it was insider trading. And if it was, hopefully they will be prosecuted. I don't care whether they're Democrat or Republican or whatever. Insider trading is insider trading, and it's illegal. So
now, I do agree with that. However, I will say this. There was a great Twitter thread from somebody much smarter than me when it comes to stocks and trades and all that kind of stuff, right? And he laid out the case against each individual because there were a total of 5. And he basically eliminated all of them but 2.
Yeah.
And in the instance of Feinstein, one of the things that he said, and I'm with you, I don't care what the letter is behind your name. You know, I just think it's wrong on epic levels. But the one thing he did say is that the briefing that took place, there were no Democrats in that meeting. It was just Republicans. That's part one. Part two is that the trade that was made was actually done by her husband, not by her. And it was something basically innocuous. I don't know the details, economic things. If it's not like blatantly simple and obvious, it probably goes over my head. But he did go over all of them, and he even eliminated like 2 or 3 of the Republicans that were called out, saying, this is basically nothing.
Yeah.
Because one of them, it was selling his shares in his brother's business, so he wasn't doing it to tank his brother. You know what I mean? It was, I don't remember what the reason was, if there was a death or he was just getting out of the business with his brother or whatever. And the timing was off. So there were a couple of factors that played into this, but Burr and that other woman who's not one of our senators, which is why I can't remember her name, they definitely, they were at the meeting, probably led the meeting, and, Burr is the chair. So he's the chair of that, whatever that,
Senate Intelligence Committee.
Kelly Loeffler from Georgia is who it was. Kelly Loeffler and Richard Burr. I'm sitting here looking it up as we're talking.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I think that they're pretty much protected from this. They may be.
They're not
of being in ethics violation, but unless they can prove that they personally said to someone, "This is why you need to sell this stock," it's very hard to prove. And I find myself doubting that they're going to be held to account for it, is my point. Like, I think they should be held account to it, and I think it's wrong, but I think it's very doubtful that they will hear anything about this.
Well,
I think that speaks more to the DOJ, though, as opposed to it being illegal, because it's most definitely illegal due to the Stock Act that was passed.
right.
And it's why I forget if he was a senator or I think a congressman, the male Collins was just charged or just sentenced in January for this.
Yeah.
And he was denying any knowledge of it.
Right.
Yes.
So it's kind of like the same thing. What are these two going to do? Are they going to try to deny it?
Yes.
Well, they're denying.
And I think that's the way Kelly Loeffler is going, where she's kind of like, oh, well, my advisor didn't tell me. He just did it. Sure he did.
Yeah, they're denying it, and that's fine. They can deny it, but like I said, I hope that the Securities and Exchange Commission at least does an investigation to try to determine if there was insider trading or not, rather than just going on a cursory, oh, well, they said they didn't do it, so we won't pay attention to it.
Right.
If the SEC investigates it and they determine after a thorough investigation that no trading laws were violated, then so be it. But there should at least be a thorough investigation into that.
I personally think that members of Congress shouldn't be able to hold stock. While they're serving, you shouldn't be able to have, you can put it in a blind trust or something like that, but
right.
You shouldn't be able to, because
well, it is interesting because it does, it's how can that not be a conflict of interest if
right.
if you own, in some cases, some of these senators and congressmen own $1 million of stock in certain companies, and how does that not influence your decisions?
Right. Or, if you own hotels, you're going to make sure that your hotels are taken care of or whatever. It's definitely something that should be looked into in the future, as far as just so things like this don't happen. There's just no way for it to happen because the setup isn't there,
Right.
All right. So,
well, and that's one thing. Gotta give props where props are due. Presumptive nominee Joe Biden for the presidency, when he was first elected to Congress, he divested all of his stock and has remained that way ever since he was in office.
Yep.
Right. And then way, there's no worry about improprieties.
Right. Well,
right.
It takes away that in that topic, it takes away even the hint of impropriety.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. No, I think that's a smart way to do it. So, alrighty. Is there still do we still have a presidential primary going on? Because I haven't heard much about that the last week or so.
Right.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's down to Sanders and Biden.
Yep. Interestingly, on that, I won't digress into that right now. We'll bring that up later, maybe. Anyway, something that we've talked about adding to our Cow Petty segment is something on the positive side, and so we've gone to the other end of the bovine species, and we're going to call this our Bullhorn Award.
Woohoo!
And I don't have a sound effect yet, so we'll get a sound effect. We'll just use that from now on. So our Bullhorn Award for this one, the recipient of our first Bullhorn Award is going to be our amazing new governor, Mr. Andy Beshear.
Yay! Clap, 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 clap.
Yeah,
Agreed.
He is receiving great feedback from folks on both sides of the aisle around his response and handling of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis.
Well deserved.
Here in Kentucky, yeah. 5 o'clock almost every day I watch his update, and he does a great job of being reassuring and providing that we're in this together. We'll get through this. It's going to be tough. And in some ways it reminds me of of listening to recordings of Churchill during World War II and the Battle for Britain, right? Where, you're giving out terrible news and terrible things are happening, but you're still building the people up and bringing them together and being reassuring.
Yes. And
Beshear has just done an amazing job of that. Absolutely amazing.
Yes.
Agreed. Agreed. And I'll add another one. In the spirit of giving credit where credit is due, and what I said about the Kentucky House GOP legislators, credit to Jason Nemes, who is one of the members of the House that's actually in our district, in District 4.
Yep.
Because when all of this started, and the, regular press conferences started with the governor talking about what was going on and the decisions that were being made and why he was making them and everything else. Jason Nemes was one of the first people, but most importantly, first legislators from the opposite party to go out and make a public statement saying that he was praying for Andy, and that even though they disagree on a lot of issues, he knew that Andy was a good man, that he was making, the best decisions that he could based on the information that he had, and he thought that he was doing a good job. So I give him boatloads of credit for that, because
Here.
For those of us living in Kentucky and knowing that, much like what we see on the federal level here in the state of Kentucky, that kind of sentiment, that kind of, just civility and respect is almost unheard of. And I guarantee you he took some flack for it.
It's rare.
Yeah, I'm sure he took some heat over that from people.
Which is ridiculous. Yeah. Ridiculous in itself.
Agreed.
But that's what happens in a hyper-partisan environment. That it gets to where you can't even acknowledge the positive aspects of people that you may not agree with, which is something we need to get back to. We can disagree on policy, but at the end of the day, as long as we're all really trying to do what's best for the Commonwealth and best for the country, then we can disagree on the specifics.
Right. I mean, he's actually got 2 bills in the state legislature that I absolutely wholeheartedly support. So, and he is he's probably the only Republican state legislator that I've ever contacted and had, any kind of actual conversation with that you could talk to.
Right.
I mean, he was willing to listen and have an actual conversation, and said to me at the time, I didn't know that. I'll have to look into that. So I don't know. He's one that I can, again, probably 95% of the time I disagree with him, but I do think he's a decent guy.
Yep, definitely. That was a good one. Good one. So anyway, that's, do we have any other bullhorns we want to throw in there while we're thinking about them? All right. So that's going to wrap up our cow patties and bullhorns, and I promise next time I'll have a sound effect for the bullhorn. And that's going to just about wrap it up this week for an abbreviated edition of our Left in Kentucky podcast. With everything going on and us having a bit more time at home these days, we're going to be changing the frequency of our podcast to weekly now. Yay!
Yay!
Woohoo!
So make sure you make that adjustment to your schedule and stay tuned. I know in a couple of weeks we have Shannon Fabbert scheduled online, and next week we're going to see who we can get lined up for next week's episode. So stay tuned. We'll just say mystery guest for now. Ooh. Keep it all mysterious.
Wonder who it
do.
Actually, I know, but yeah.
Oh, so yeah.
So guys, stay safe out there. Practice your social distancing, if at all possible. It's gonna really help us flatten the curve. So.
Yep.
Yes.
So yeah, stay safe, stay healthy out there, and stay in touch. Keep up with what's going on. Stay involved online, and we'll be back in a week with a new podcast. In the meantime, this is Roberto Henriquez,
Amy Ferguson,
and Dickerson,
and we'll talk to you later. Left in Kentucky, the podcast of indivisible Northern Kentucky.